Hi, hello to everyone. I'm glad to see some of you again, or glad to meet some of you, even if it's only virtually. I would have loved to travel or to see you in person, but Victoria just told us, just reminded us of the fact that this is, I think it's a basic feature of research and of archiving work to meet people in person, but we all know why this is not possible at the moment. In the 10 to 12 minutes I will talk now, I more or less stick to the questions that Victoria mailed to us speakers, but also to those questions that are on the website of this conference. So how do digital technologies change what Holocaust archives can be and can do? And my example, of course, is Arolsen archives. We put millions of documents online, which 6 or 7 years ago, when I started at Arolsen, we never thought would be possible and in this extent. I will talk about the advantages and disadvantages and also about the chances and maybe even the risks that are involved. I think digital technologies and mainly digitization in the form of scanning and of publishing things online has two perspectives. There's the perspective of the people working at the archives of us. And then, of course, and I guess this is more important, that's the perspective of our users of archives and of especially of users of online archives. This is not specific for Holocaust archives, but it's valid in general that through digital technologies, archives can become more visible. We can use this visibility to show the relevance of our work, of archiving, of cataloging, and so on. And of course, we can use this visibility to show the relevance of the documents that we hold. And this, as I said, goes for every archive, but especially for Holocaust archives, I think they're of utmost relevance, have always been of utmost relevance in the past 75 years, but especially in these days. Sad to remind us of that. That's the perspective of us working at the archives, that we can use online technologies, digital technologies to become more visible and to become more relevant. The user's perspectives has also been touched upon by Karel and by Gilly already. And I've seen in the chat that I think Rosie Whitehouse made it very clear. I didn't, of course, I couldn't prepare this, but I think that's the best expression for it. Without online archives and without digital technologies, some of the researchers wouldn't be able to do their work because you can save travel time, you can save travel costs, and in times like these where you can't travel at all or very limited travel possibilities, you can still access archives as long as they're online or as long as at least the cataloging information is online. So we'll briefly share my screen to show you our online archive. This is the starting page. You can browse the archive, you can search for names or topics in the archives, but you can also browse it by going through these collections. And it doesn't work now, but anyway, I promise you it does work. And if you want to, I can share the links via the chat. Large numbers of our users still search for names. We know that because we can follow that. A lot of them are actually family members of former persecuted persons, persons persecuted by the Nazis. But also we have researchers and educators on our website with most of them also search for names and persons, but a lot of them, of course, browse the internet, browse our archives and look for specific other information. We have not yet exhausted all the chances and possibilities digital technologies give or will give. Karel already mentioned some, that ARI has developed some tools to share other information. I'm thinking of visualizations we've seen on Gilly's website. We have published an e-guide, which in addition to this website that you're just seeing, tells you a lot more about the documents that are in there. And I think in the future, the use of big data and new approaches in research would be one way to make use of online archives. It's not yet possible yet because you cannot download the whole thing, of course not. And this has legal reasons, and I'm not sure whether, as an archivist, I would love to do that. But sharing data and big data might be one way for a better user possibility of online archives. And this leads me to the challenges of digitization. Of course, and sticking to the example of online archives, of course, there's a lot of background work, and Arolsen Archives, or back then ITS, had a huge head start because we started digitizing in 1998. And without these early efforts, we wouldn't have these millions of images today, which we can put online. At the same time, this early digitization means that of course, we have not followed standards in the early 2000 years because there were no standards, and we haven't followed rules. So some of our documents are still in black and white. You cannot see how big the original document is, which is very important for researchers, of course. For small institutions, this costly and time-consuming digitization of documents might seem as the biggest and first challenge. However, of course, there's a lot of more work to do, and this is something we at Arolsen experienced, that better online access to documents means that you have to do a better preparation in cataloging and indexing, and of course, also in explaining what people see on the web. And this, again, is not specific to Holocaust archives, but it's very important to Holocaust archives to explain what you see in these documents, what you may not see on these documents, and how would you interpret them. And also contextualize the documents. This is something we were afraid of. We haven't made any bad experiences yet, but I think this is one of the risks if you put documentation like this online. What happens to it if someone puts it out of context and uses it for something else? This leads me to the third questions. What are the limits of users' relationships? Especially as Victoria asked, what are the limits of online online access? Of course, lacking the physical and emotional touch with the document is something which is important. But the way we've experienced it, and if users come to our reading room in Arolsen, they also work with the digital documents. They don't see the originals, but they work with the digital archive, not with the originals. And in 6 years since I've been to Arolsen, it only happened to me twice that a user asked me, can I see the original document? Because I want to see more details, I want to touch it or whatever. And to be very honest, it was a colleague of mine. So no outside users ever asked for the original yet. And it can be very emotional for people who are more involved, or even more involved than researchers, as this example that you see here, which is the registration questionnaire from concentration camp in Dachau. And you see the signature of the prisoner on the lower left. And of course, for someone who is part of the family of this prisoner, this is very emotional, because very often this can be the only trace, the only personal trace that is left of a prisoner if he was murdered in the camp, and if there are no diaries or letters or any other personal information that has come to the generations after. So this can be very personal, very important. I guess the fact why so few people ask for the original in our document, in our archives, is that they seem to be very administrative. Usually it's the perpetrator's perspective that we share in our documents, or it's very administrative, even if it's an aid association like the UNRWA or IRO that helped survivors after 1945, after liberation. Yet it's very administrative, and it seems to lack the personal touch. And again, let me share one anecdote that then stresses the opposite. We had this central name index with millions of index cards, and as it already says, these are only index cards. These are not original documents. These are cards that helped us find the way through our own archives. And it's now part of the exhibition we show in Arolsen. But in former times, we used to go with people into the archive room and showed them some of the documents. And I've experienced it with one lady from Italy. Her father was a forced laborer. He had survived persecution. He came back to Italy. But after he passed away, she went through all the places where he'd been. And of course, she also went to Arolsen because she knew we have some documentation. And we were in this room with the central name index. And she said, can I see the card with the name of my father? And I reminded her, well, we can try to find it. It's more than 50 million cards, and I'm sure whether I will find it, but I will try. And I said, but let me remind you, this is only a reference card. This is not a card from the time before 1945. It's just a reference, but it will contain the name of your father. And she said, yes, I know, I understand, but I want to see it. And the closer we got to this card, we chose the box and we went through the cards. The closer we got, the more emotional she was. And when I finally found the card of her father, she burst into tears. And it shows that showing the document and being able to touch the document and seeing it is very important, especially in the context of Holocaust archives or archives of Nazi persecution, where there's so few traces being left of the people persecuted that just one name or just one card becomes even more important than in other archives. And this, of course, is something we cannot share digitally or online. Yet I think you can do both, and we should do both, and we should keep online archives open to make research possible and to make it possible that people work with that. What are possibilities, not only limits, what are possibilities to maybe engage our online users even more? I have two last examples of that. You can leave comments on our archive, as you see here. I'm not sure whether you can see it. If you use a Discus, which is an online tool, you can leave comments on the documents, and this has to be moderated. Of course, we go through every comment that is being posted before we put it online. And in 4 years, there's only been 2 examples where we did not post it online because it wasn't appropriate. It was just something we didn't want other people to see. But there's dozens of comments coming in, giving us more information, giving other users more information, sharing that, which I think is something, it's a very basic tool, but it's something that can be worked upon and that should be worked upon and elaborated. Another chance to engage more people is actually something you've already seen. We started the campaign Every Name Counts, where people can, through crowdsourcing on the Zooniverse platform, which is very popular in natural sciences and natural history, where people index our work. And this has proven to be very successful. I have to admit that me as the archivist, I was very skeptical about this, but the information that is given is of very high quality. We can use it for archives, we enrich our archives, and within a few months' time, we have a community of 8,000 people helping us indexing our own documents. And this is something, coming back to the original question, that only digital and online archives can do. At long last, a few further comments to think about. I think what are the challenges and the risks of online archives is, of course, the authenticity may be doubted of our documents by people who doubt everything, or just, bluntly speaking, idiots. But I think this is something where it's very important to be very open and evident. Where do the documents come from? Where do we keep them? How did we get them? What is the history of the document? And again, putting them into a context. The information can be blurred, of course, if someone uses documents from our online archive, puts it somewhere else, and just writes something on it that we don't like. And of course, and I've already mentioned this, comments we do not want to publish. So I would suggest that every comment has to be moderated before it's put online. And One last example we've experienced when we share documents via social media, which we always also do. If you share a document, for example, from a concentration camp and on Facebook, on Twitter, and people like the document, what do they like? Do they like that we put it online? Do they like the contents of the document? Or do they like that someone is being remembered because there's a name on this document? And I think this is something we want to be open archives. We want to be online. We use the challenge, that we use the opportunities that digital technologies give us, but this is something we have to be aware of. And with this thought, maybe we can discuss it later on. And thank you.